The third area, as I mentioned before, we've come to the recognition that many of the things we are concerned about, that we call the non-negotiables, are at major variance with what Jesus clearly emphasized. And I'm going to list them. How can you read the 8 Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount and not believe Jesus was teaching nonviolence? It's impossible. It's impossible. But so what we do, we just didn't read it, right? Now what happened, of course, and you've heard me say this before, some of you, the turning point is the year 313, the Edict of Constantine, where overnight we become the imperial religion, right? And we are used to create social order in Europe. We are the belonging system for Europe. Once you are the army, instead of being persecuted in the catacombs, everything Jesus says about nonviolence is unhearable. It's unthinkable. It's impossible. It can't even be allowed. So we would keep reading the teachings of Jesus, but there was a lens that disallowed us actually hearing what he was saying. His teaching on peacemaking was not possible. When I read in some of these election brochures last week that the non-negotiables were to be pro-life as defined recently, against stem cell research as defined recently, to be against contraception, I said, where did we create these new non-negotiables? Wouldn't you think, and I'm not standing on my opinion here, but the clear teaching of Jesus, wouldn't you think the clear non-negotiable in Jesus is forgiveness and love of enemies? That's the non-negotiable in the teaching of Jesus. Love your enemy. And I'm saying this to you clearly. You've got to do it. But we didn't teach that. It wasn't considered central teaching of Jesus at all. It's right at the heart of the matter. That could have changed history, right? But we weren't interested in changing this world. Remember, as Brian McLaren says, we got involved in an evacuation plan for the next world. So in fact, we've been largely the warmongers ourselves. None of the Christian nations have a record of peacemaking. None of them. None of them. Right? It wasn't even on the radar screen. And yet they dared to call themselves Christians. We have to go to our Mennonite and Amish and Quaker brothers and sisters who, thank God, retained the peace witness of the church. Justice and generosity toward the poor and the outsider. That's quite clear, quite absolute, page after page after page of the Gospels. And now Christians think nothing of amassing massive fortunes, right? Living grandly. And this has been true of the papacy, been true of bishops, been true of priests. You can see why in religious life we said, at least you take a vow of poverty. Now we became pretty comfortable ourselves, as you know, because even Jesus' bias toward the poor was something that rich nations did not want to hear. Our Jesus' care for the poor is something that just didn't fit in our radar screen. His consistent message of inclusivity. You find a story where Jesus excludes, right? He will name the moment correctly, but he never excludes people. And yet, I think most people's estimation of most Christian denominations is they are largely exclusionary institutions. You don't fit, you don't fit. It's the life-saving station that has become a country club with its own membership rules. And even the Eucharist itself is used, at least in my Catholic church, to define the worthy, the pure, the true members. When every time Jesus eats, he seems to be eating with the wrong people at the wrong table, or saying the wrong things, or not washing his hands ahead of time. In fact, one scholar says, he says that you could say Jesus was crucified because of who he ate with. Jesus was crucified because who he ate with. that he redid the social order, and this upset both church and state.